The Return of the Indian by Lynne Reid Banks, Chapter 6, Going for Help. Omri locked his bedroom door behind him and went downstairs. It was Friday night, luckily, or he'd have had homework, which he wouldn't have been able to do. His parents and Guion were watching television. Adele had gone out with friends. "Mum, do you remember Patrick?" He spoke very casually. "Of course I remember Patrick. He moved to the country." "I know. I saw him last week." "Where?" "Outside school. He said his mother had come back for a visit." "To a sister, I expect." His mother turned back to the set. "Her sister? I didn't know Patrick had an aunt." "Don't be silly, of course you did. She lived 3 doors down from our old house." Patrick frowned, remembering. "With those 2 revolting little girls?" "Tamsin and Emma. Bonkins or something. Donkins. They're Patrick's cousins." "Do you think Patrick might be there?" "You can soon find out. I've still got a phone number in my book. It's on the hall table." 3 minutes later, Omri had Patrick's voice in his ear. "Patrick, it's me, Omri. I've got to see you." "When?" "Tonight." "Tonight?" "It's very important. Can't it wait?" Omri sensed the reluctance in Patrick's voice. He understood it. "No." "I'm watching a horror film." "The horror film doesn't start till 11:30, Omri retorted. There was a silence. "If you're going to start with all that rubbish about—" "I'm coming," said Omri shortly, and rang off. He slipped out the back door and was soon running down Hobble Road for the station. Some of the shops and the amusement arcade were still open. So were the pubs. Their glass doors let out friendly glow and lots of loud voices as Omri dashed past. In the amusement arcade, the skinheads were banging away at the Space Invaders. Not noisy camaraderie like the pub-goers, but grim, intent, each bent over a machine. They didn't notice him. Omri ran swiftly on with a feeling of relief. This horrible street was actually safer by night. Sometimes you had to wait ages for a train, but tonight Omri was lucky, though the journey, only 3 stops, seemed to take forever. At the other end, he began to run again. But he wasn't scared this time. He found the house of their old neighbor and rang the bell. Patrick came and stood looking at him in a far from welcoming way. "Well, you'd better come in now you're here," he said. It was a small house, just like their old one, even to the bicycles crowding the narrow hall. Omri's mother had said, only half as a joke, that the reason she'd wanted to move to the new house was so they needn't ever have bikes in the hall anymore. Patrick led the way upstairs without a word into a small back bedroom with a pair of bunk beds, everything pink and frothy. "My aunt makes me sleep in this puffy girl's room," he said. "I'm glad I'm going home tomorrow." He sat down on the bottom bunk, leaving Omri standing. There was a brief silence. Patrick glanced at Omri. His mouth was pinched. His eyes said, "Don't talk about it." He was slightly begging Omri not to, but Omri was ruthless. "Why are you pretending it never happened?" he asked sharply. "What?" said Patrick. He had a sullen, stupid look like those skinheads. "You know what?" Patrick stared at the floor. He didn't move. "I brought them back," said Omri. Patrick stood up so suddenly he hit his head on the top bunk. His face had gone white. He swore under his breath, and he said, "I don't believe you." "I'm telling you, I put them in the cupboard and the same thing happened. He didn't like to use the word magic somehow. "It's still working, just the same, only—" Patrick was looking at him now, frowning, incredulous, as if he had woken from a dream to find the dream was still going on. "The trouble is, little Bear's been shot." After a pause, Patrick muttered something under his breath. Omri leaned forward. "What?" "It's not true. None of it's true. We just made it up," he half whispered. Omri took his hand out of his pocket and held something out to Patrick. "Look, and stop kidding yourself." Almost as if he was fighting fear, Patrick slowly looked. He blinked several times. Then he put his hand back and unwrapped the twisted paper. He stared for a long time at the tiny beaded moccasins. "They're real," breathed Patrick. He turned away to the window and stood looking out into the darkness. Omri let him adjust. When he turned around, he was the old Patrick again, older but basically unchanged. "How did it happen?" Omri had a mad impulse to hug him. Now at least he was not alone with it. "Some French soldiers shot him. I suppose he was French." "Some French soldiers shot him. I suppose he was French. You know the Iroquois were fighting with the English, and the French were against them. We've got to find a way to get the bullets out, or the musket balls, or whatever they are." "Easy," Patrick said. "Get Tommy back." Omri swallowed. "He's dead." Patrick's mouth fell open. Dead! He must have been killed in the war. He said last time, when we were sending him back, that he could hear a big shell coming over. I bet it was the one that got him. Patrick stared at him aghast. Do you mean if we hadn't sent him back at that minute? I don't think that's how it works. His real big body, that must have still been there in his time, lying asleep in the trench. The shell would have killed him anyway. Patrick pushed his hand through his hair. And you say little Bear's hurt? Yes, Bright Stars is with him. She thinks the spirits brought her to me to help save his life. I've got to do something, and I don't know what. Omri checked the shrill edge of desperation in his voice. Patrick sat still, thinking. What happened to your old plastic people, he asked at last, that we used to play with? I think they're up in our loft. Mum threw mine away. Threw them away? Asked Omri unbelievingly, without asking. I hadn't played with them for ages. Why, anyway? Look, said Patrick. We lost Tommy, but the magic still works. We could find a modern doctor figure. He'd be even better. This disloyalty to their dead friend stuck both of them at once, and Patrick flushed. I didn't mean Tommy saved Boone's life. I know that. But we've got to be realistic. There's been a lot of advances, new drugs, new technologies. Haven't you got anyone in your collection who might... Omri thought, and then shook his head. All mine were cowboys and knights and soldiers and stuff like that, he said. Patrick stood up. But there are modern ones. I've seen them. I've seen them very recently. His face changed. He almost yelled, Wait! And rushed from the room. A few minutes later, he was back. Look! In his hand was a large, flat cardboard box of brand new plastic figures. They weren't soldiers or Indians. They were ordinary people from now. One look told Omri what sort. Professional people. There was a judge in a long wig and several lawyers. There were businessmen with briefcases, one in the bowler hat. There were scientists in laboratory coats. There was a nurse, and Omri let out a shout. There were doctors, 2 of them to be exact. One was an ordinary doctor with a stethoscope around his neck, and the other was a surgeon in a green gown and mask. Almost gibbering with excitement and relief, he felt as if he were looking into Aladdin's cave. Omri peered closer. The man was bent over an operating table. Yes! What Omri had been hoping for was there. Instruments, trays of them. All parts of the same group. Little Bear was as good as saved. That's it! He cried. Come on, let's go! But, incredibly, Patrick was hesitating. What's wrong? Said Omri impatiently. They're not mine. Oh, so what? Whose are they? My cousin, she got them yesterday for her birthday. We'll give them back. Tamsin goes mad if you touch her things. She's sure to notice it's gone. But Little Bear may be dying. Patrick gave a shrug. Okay, better wrap them up. They found an old Safeway's bag and dropped the whole box in it. They were just going downstairs when a door opened and a girl Omri remembered only too well came out into the hall. Patrick stopped dead like a burglar caught in the act. Oh, God, it's her, he muttered. See you later. But he didn't turn tail. They just kept going on toward the front door. Tamsin barred their way. She was a big girl for her age, with a pronounced jaw and scowling brows. Where are you off to, Paddywhack? She asked tauntingly. She ignored Omri, although she recognized him. They'd never been precisely pally. I'm going out for a bit. Does your mum know? I was just going to tell her. Ah, bet. I was, excuse me. As he brushed past her, some possessive instinct must have warned her. She grabbed the bag. Patrick hadn't expected this and let go of it. In a flash, she had opened it and peered in. The face she raised was suddenly flushed with fury. You're stealing my present, she said slowly and menacingly. No, we're not. We're only borrowing it for the night. For the night? Are you crazy? I wouldn't let you borrow it for 5 seconds. Something was boiling up in Omri's head. There went everything they needed to save Little Bear. That wretched girl was clutching it to her, as if they were trying to part her from a bag of gold. We were going to ask you, he babbled untruthfully. Please lend them to us. No! Her face and voice were stone. He knew she would never give way. An impulse born of desperation seized him. He reached out and tried to snatch the bag back from her. She held on and screeched. The bag tore, the box fell out, and its lid came off. There on the floor lay the whole array of figures, held firmly to their backing by elastic string. Omri didn't hesitate. He simply fell on top of them, his fingers under them, clutching and wrenching. Tamsin fell on top of him, clutching and wrenching him. He felt his ear being wrung half off, his head being pounded, and his ankle kicked, sharp as a dog bite, by Tamsin's pointed shoe, as they writhed, first one bicycle and then a second crashed down on top of them. A moment later a door slammed and an exasperated adult's voice roared, "Have you kids gone mad? Stop it this instant! Tamsin!" She and the tangle of bikes were hiked bodily off him, putting a stop to the immediate torture, though aches lingered. "They're nicking my present! They're nicking my models!" shrieked the dangling Tamsin, thrashing all her limbs in the air like a monstrous swoop spider. "Patrick!" But Patrick was already at the front door, and Omri was scrambling to his feet. "We don't want her models," he muttered. "It was only a joke." And before more could be said, they were outside. Patrick's mother appeared in the doorway, crying after them. "Where do you boys think you're going?" Patrick yelled back, "I'm sleeping over at Omri's." "Come back!" yelled his mother. "You haven't got your toothbrush!" But they were already around the corner. And that is the end of chapter 6.